Imagine a car from 1930s Detroit that looks less like a conventional automobile and more like a streamlined machine from a science fiction film. That is the Harris Steamcar, a one-off prototype created by H.R. Harris, a Detroit steam engineer who believed steam power still had a future on American roads. Harris worked for the city of Detroit designing and operating steam-powered electric generating plants. So this was not simply a stylist experimenting with an unusual body. He understood steam systems professionally, and he was frustrated by the problems that had affected earlier steam automobiles, including the Stanley and Doble cars. His answer was to create something completely different. A large, enclosed, highly aerodynamic steam car with a futuristic body that would make a normal 1930s sedan look almost old-fashioned. The Lane Motor Museum catalogues the surviving prototype as the Harris Steamcar, 1938, while its own specifications cautiously list the production year as 1936, and other historical references call it the 1936 Harris Aerodynamic Steamcar. That uncertainty is worth mentioning because very little original documentation survives, but there is no doubt that only one example was built. The shape of the Harris is what immediately separates it from almost everything else built in America during the period. Instead of upright glass, separate fenders, and a tall conventional roof, Harris created a long, rounded body with a smooth nose, enclosed front sections, and a flowing roofline that appears to have been designed with airflow in mind. The front wheels sit beneath enormous rounded fenders, while the rear portion stretches into a large, streamlined cabin with unusually small side windows. The result looks surprisingly modern, even though it was created more than 80 years ago. Historical descriptions of the surviving car indicate that the body was handmade, with the metalwork apparently produced by employees of the Fleetwood Body Company working at night. The body was never painted, which makes the bare metal appearance seen today particularly interesting because it reveals the construction and shaping of the panels, rather than hiding them under a finished color. A historical sale description placed the vehicle at close to 20 feet in length and approximately 5,000 pounds, although these figures should be treated as period estimates rather than factory specifications. Reliable published measurements for the width and height have not been found, so those numbers should not be invented simply to complete a specification sheet. What makes the Harris even more fascinating is the way its body was arranged around a completely different type of powertrain. Unlike almost every conventional American car of the late 1930s, the Harris used a rear-mounted steam power unit and rear-wheel drive. Lane Motor Museum identifies the engine as a Stanley Steamer unit rated at 20 horsepower, connected through a direct drive system rather than a conventional multi-speed transmission. Another historical discussion of the prototype describes the steam engine as producing approximately 30 horsepower, so there is some disagreement in secondary sources. Because the Lane Motor Museum is the institution preserving the actual surviving car, its 20 horsepower specification is the safer figure to use. The museum also gives a projected or listed top speed of approximately 40 miles per hour. The unusual layout meant that the steam machinery was concentrated toward the rear, while the controls and gauges were routed forward to the driver. A condenser was positioned at the front, where it could receive airflow and return condensed water to the system. That arrangement demonstrates that Harris was not simply putting an old steam engine into a strange body. He was trying to rethink how an entire steam automobile could be packaged. The steam system itself is probably the most interesting part of the car because it explains why Harris believed his idea could succeed where earlier steam automobiles had struggled. Steam cars had several potential advantages, including smooth power delivery and the ability to produce strong torque without a conventional gearbox. But they also had serious practical problems involving startup time, water management, boilers, and control systems. Harris knew those weaknesses because his professional career involved steam-powered electrical generating equipment. The Lane Motor Museum notes that he had been disappointed by the failures of both Stanley and Doble steamcars, and his goal was apparently to build a unique and stylish machine that could help revive interest in steam automobiles. In the Harris, the engine was mounted at the rear and connected by direct drive, while the condenser was located at the front. This created an unusual mechanical arrangement in which the car's controls and instruments had to be connected across the length of the body. The concept was ambitious for a private one-off project, especially because Harris was attempting to combine the complexity of steam technology with a large aerodynamic automobile, rather than building a small experimental runabout. Inside, the Harris was much more conventional than its exterior might suggest, although even here the unusual proportions created a distinctive environment. A historical description of the car's interior reported 2 individual seats at the front and a large, heavily upholstered sofa-style rear seat. That arrangement gave the cabin the feel of a private touring machine rather than a normal sedan, while the enormous body provided plenty of room for passengers and mechanical equipment. One particularly strange detail was the use of the rear seat armrests for storage. The right armrest reportedly housed the spare tire, while the left concealed the fuel tank. That tells you just how unconventional the packaging was. Components that normally occupied separate compartments were being hidden inside the passenger area, because the body had been designed around the unusual steam system. The forward controls and gauges were reportedly sourced from or inspired by Packard equipment, giving the driver's area a familiar appearance despite the radically different machinery underneath. The windows and body openings were also shaped to preserve the streamlined character, so the interior was enclosed within a shell that looked more like an aerodynamic coach than a conventional American automobile. The story of what happened to the Harris after it was built is almost as uncertain as the story of its construction. One frequently repeated claim is that the car was intended as a display vehicle for the 1939 New York World's Fair, but the historical source that preserves this story specifically says that the claim could never be confirmed or denied. What is better documented is that the unusual machine remained associated with the Harris family for many years. Harris's grandson, Wayne Butel, remembered playing in the car as a child and recalled that the project had cost his grandfather a considerable amount of money. The car eventually remained in the Harris estate until the early 1960s, after which it passed through other owners. During the 1980s, one owner reportedly acquired it primarily for its steam engine and drive assembly, removing the power unit from the chassis. The body then remained stored until another collector obtained it in 2003. That history explains why so much about the car remains uncertain today, including whether it ever actually operated under its own power. Lane Motor Museum has stated that nobody seems to know for certain whether the completed Harris ever really ran. Today, the Harris Steamcar is important precisely because it represents an idea that almost disappeared before it could be properly tested. The car was never mass-produced, and there is no evidence that Harris succeeded in creating the new generation of steam automobiles he had imagined. Yet that failure almost makes the machine more interesting. Its enormous body, smooth nose, rear-mounted machinery, and unusual interior show a man trying to solve the weaknesses of steam power through engineering and design, rather than simply accepting that gasoline had already won the future. The Harris Steamcar remains a remarkable reminder that automotive history is filled with machines that disappeared before the world could decide whether their ideas were brilliant or impractical. And if you enjoy discovering forgotten prototypes, strange engineering experiments, and futuristic vehicles that most people have never heard of, make sure to subscribe to On Wheels, because there are many more extraordinary machines waiting to be uncovered.